I'm Bob Turner from Pittsburgh, Texas, and I'm going to be giving this presentation. As you can see here, we have a map of Texas, the Texas Highway Department map, and I have drawn in here some lines which define northeast Texas from an archaeological standpoint. This area, the archaeology was much the same. When you get beyond it and away down here to the south, it was different. So we have something unique in our area. Now please understand that the Indians that preceded us by thousands of years and hundreds of years didn't recognize these lines. So these archaeological areas extended over into the other states, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma up here, particularly the Caddo area, all in here. Now let me turn back one page. Mankind has lived in our area, not in great groups sometimes, but has lived in our area for over 10,000 years. I have a chart here. This is the time of Christ, this line, AD and BC. If we drop down to the end here, archaeologically, this time period is called the Paleo-Indian period. And Paleo is a word which means very old, as does archaic here. Paleo-Indian. During this time period, in the early part was when the people were the wanderers, when they killed the mammoths and the mastodon, and the bison antiquus, which was a buffalo that existed and is about 50% larger than the earlier kind. Now we know that man lived because that's when these animals lived, which was, you know, a few thousand years after the Ice Age, and the Great Plains had opened up from the Canadian border to the south, and these animals lived. Now these people have left certain sorts of dart points, which are named here: Scotts Bluff, San Patrice, Plainview, Dalton, Folsom, and Clovis. These points have been found with the remains of these animals that had been killed by these points, so we know that the animal and the point, and therefore man, existed at the same time. Now in our little area of northeast Texas, many of these point types have been found. Clovis has, Dalton has, Plainview, San Patrice, and Scotts Bluff. Now I'm not aware of any Folsoms, but they are probably some been found that I'm not aware of. Okay, that was from 6,000 to 10,000 BC. This period is called the Archaic period. All of these animals were now extinct. They didn't live anymore. So the people had to develop a new means of living, a new means of gathering their food. And they were wanderers. They were nomadic people. This meant that they did not have agriculture, and I will also say that down here they did not have the bow and arrow. It had not been invented yet. In this time period, it appears that these people mainly had their points mounted on spears, and if they were going after a mammoth or something of that nature, they had to get close enough to him to jam it up in him, and several of them probably would. It's a dangerous way to get your food. Now of course this wasn't all they ate by any manner of means. They collected food just like these people, the nuts and berries and what have you. In this time period, they were a little more settled, but they might live in one spot. They might live in one spot for a short period of time. I say short period, a month or so, where they gathered all the local food that they could find, and then they'd move on to another spot, and they'd clean it out, and then another. But then they would rotate back over the course of a year and come back and live where they had before. Therefore, over hundreds and thousands of years, there's been accumulation of junk and trash and artifacts. Okay. Of East Texas, this period, this growth of man from one stage to another has turned into what is called archaeologically an early ceramic time period, which begins about 200 BC and extends to about 700 BC. During this period, the people were living just like they did here. They were food gatherers, they were nomads, they were wanderers, and they made these circuits from camp to camp and area to area. But something of great importance occurred during this time. That is, pottery came into being. Now before, they did not know how to make their stone pot, their pots. Now we have pottery made from clay and baked in just perfectly good pottery vessels. During the latter part of this period, the bow and arrow came into use. And so here they've got pottery, bow and arrow, and then the big break came, which was agriculture. Agriculture worldwide has been the one item which has allowed people to live in one spot. And that's the only thing that allows us to live in one spot, is the availability of food. So the main article that they had, of course, was corn. Now where that came from, whether it came from Mexico or whether it came from other eastern states into our area, we don't really know at this time. But with corn agriculture, maize agriculture it's called, you could raise a crop, have something to carry over the winter, and you could live in the same house the year round, which meant that you could have a better place to live. And this was the beginning of what we call our Caddo period. Really, the name Caddo comes from the word Caddo, pardon me, Caddo Hadacho. It's contracted into Caddo. And our time period, our time period is represented in this little narrow band up there. This is when the Anglos came into this part of East Texas. In other words, from roughly 1830s to the present time, which is not very long when you look at this scale of years. Now, I think what I will do now is show you some of the artifacts that belong to these periods. Lacey, I'm going to walk up here kind of close and maybe you can see these. This is a Clovis point. It looks like it has been reworked since it was first made, but the main distinguishing feature are these long flutes that are flint flakes that have been taken out of each face of these points. Now that's very difficult to do. Some modern flint knappers can do these just as well as the Indians can or could. This is called a Scotch Bluff point. It's a distinctive shape, very fat, beautifully made, and this one is a San Patrice point. Now I'll walk back over here by my little board. The Clovis points and the Scotch Bluff points that are found in this area of Texas are not made from native material, which tells us that the people that brought these here were visitors, because the stone material that these are made of came from somewhere else. However, the San Patrice points are made of native materials, and these people were the permanent residents here. Okay. I'm going to show you some of the artifacts here that come from the Archaic period. And I would like to tell you that if you pick up arrow points in fields and so forth, most likely this is the period that you find them, that they belong to. So they're quite old. Now, one of the keys to this period of time, the Archaic period, was the development of the atlatl. That's a word used by the Aztec people. And it's a gadget that looked like this. It was a stick with a hook in the end of it of some sort, and then there was a dart, a small spear. The points that you find belong to these darts. The gadget was used like this. It was held in one hand here, and using a thumb and a couple of fingers here to steady this dart, it was thrown in this manner. What this thing does is to lengthen your arm effectively so that the dart that is thrown goes faster, it's at a higher velocity, and it has higher penetrating power. Now, primitive peoples all over the world have used this device, and some of them are still using it today. The northern Eskimos sometimes use this. It's particularly good on sea mammals. It's the reason they've lasted so long, apparently. And in Mexico, there's one village area where every year they get out and kill great quantities of ducks using this device. The Aborigines of Australia still use this device. The ones that are really out in the outback and have to take care of themselves. So this evolved worldwide. It's a device to get more velocity to the spear. The little points that you probably find similar to these here, just small dart points, of course, were attached to the end, and very likely they had feathers like on an arrow to impart a little drag to keep the thing aerodynamically working correctly. During this archaic time period, the people were great stone workers. For example, here are stone axes, and they're grooved. There's a groove around there where the split piece of material went that was tied onto it. These are hematite axes made from our local ore-bearing material. There's a very pretty example right here. Also, these people used grinding stones. Here is just an ordinary sandstone tool that you can see is recessed on both sides, and they used a little grinding implement like this. Now, at this time, remember, they didn't have corn, they didn't have agriculture, and so they must have used these for nuts and berries and things that they were mixing up to make their meals out of. Now, this little stone I was using here has little impressions on both sides of it. You find these with maybe impression just on one. But we call these nut stones. We really don't know that that's what they used them for, but it seems like that would be sort of a practical use for it. You can set a hickory nut here and pop it with another rock, and it doesn't roll around quite so much. Sometimes these grinding stones have a little deeper depression in the middle of it too, just for perhaps they used them that way. Now, these people were great stone workers. You saw the axe I showed you a while ago. Here's a couple of other items. This is called a boat stone. It's a piece of stone that's been shaped out and looks very much like a small canoe. This is broken, you can see, but this was a pendant of stone that probably the other end looked about like this one and was very likely suspended around the neck in a manner something like that. Now I think I'll get a drink of water, if you don't mind.
That's good. 4:45. That's right. All righty.
Well, folks, I've got a new chart right here, and this encompasses what we call the Caddo period, from about 700 A.D., when agriculture was first known to these people, up to 1700 A.D. And after that, the Caddo, there is a fifth Caddo period in which European trade goods were getting to the people, and their lifestyle changed drastically from this time on. In these early periods here, they were distinguished by large villages with several mounds. They had exotic trade goods, that is, trade goods that came in from far distances, like copper from Michigan, and abalone shell from the Pacific coast, and items of this nature, and pipestone from Minnesota. And at this time they apparently had a what you would call a hierarchical leadership. That is, somebody at the top with his ranks of followers down this way, and then all the rest of the folks down here that were working very hard to give the leadership a good life. This meant that they had several mounds. Most of these mounds were used as substructure mounds. That is, it was just a structure for a house or houses on top, which probably had to do with their religion or perhaps the domicile of the head man. One of these mound sites in Titus County is called the Hale Mounds, which is a protected site now. There are several mounds there, and many people lived in the area and supported the hierarchy that lived at this site. The best display of this in Texas is at down south of Alto, Texas, at Mound State Park, where they have a great little museum, and they have a walking tour where you can go and see the mounds as well. And they also had a house, I believe, built there in the Indian style. Well, this type of life became onerous to the people. They didn't like it. They were working too hard for too few. And so this lifestyle broke down, and smaller villages occurred. People went off in smaller groups. Now, there were still mounds, but generally smaller, and not many, not so many. And then the last phase here is called we call it archaeologically the Titus Focus. Now I'm going to switch back real quickly to the map. This is the Titus Focus area, as if you focused the camera on a place. It's Cypress Creek runs down the middle of it pretty much, and the tributary streams that run into it cover this area. Now I'd like to say that these other little patches here are where the Indians lived in East Texas when the earliest explorers found this area. 1542, when Moscoso, leading the DeSoto expedition, came across, mentioned Indians. Now, we don't know specifically where, but he mentioned them. It was probably right here. In the late 1600s, when the La Salle people and the Spanish missionaries came to the area, the Indians lived here. This is the Nacogdoches, Rusk, Alto area. Natchitoches, Louisiana. The Indians lived there. These were all Caddo, incidentally. A group near Shreveport called Yatasi, and the main Caddo grouping up here on the bend of the Red River. There were several tribes in here of the Caddo. Now, if you will follow me over to these artifacts, these are what we have from these people. The great pottery, pipes over here as well, of various sorts. These are early Caddo here, and these are the later parts. Finally, when the Europeans came into this area, you find the European glass beads made in Venice, brought in primarily by the French. The Indians loved this, and things like iron knives. So we have covered an awful lot of territory in a very short time, and I hope you have enjoyed this.
We're about to close this presentation out for the Dallas Baker Notebook, and I want to tell you, Bob, how I appreciate you going through this again for the camera, so that the people...
My pleasure, Dallas.
So that the people in the viewing area can see it. But I've asked him to do one more thing that he did the other night for the presentation, and he can make fire without any matches, and I'm going to ask him to do that. And so go ahead and do your thing. I'll lay the mic down here so you can talk a little bit if you want to.
Okay.
But make us some fire.
Now, I don't know if we're going to get fire here or not, folks, but we ought to get some smoke. This is old sycamore, this is pine, and of course your bow can be anything. So we're going to run this back and forth and get a little friction here.
Man, you got smoke now. Can you? And I think what you do is get an ember and then blow it until it...
That's right. We didn't get it.
Well, you might...
I made a lot of smoke, but I didn't
Yeah,
get
you
the
made
fire.
the smoke. Well, that's good enough. We know what you can do, and if you had another half an hour and you was out somewhere where you needed a fire, you could eventually get it.
Yeah, if I needed it enough.
Thank you very much, and for the Dallas Baker Notebook, until next time, Geronimo.